The Forgotten Ones. Chapter 5. The Descent. Ellis hadn't moved in hours. The static-filled phone lay in the center of the room, its faint hum mixing with the oppressive silence that swallowed his apartment. His thoughts raced, frantically searching for a way out, a way to escape the invisible chains tightening around him. The Watcher hadn't just followed him. It was inside now, creeping through every crack, lingering in every shadow. And it was waiting. He stood by the window, staring down at the empty street below. The Watcher's figure had vanished, but the feeling of its presence had only intensified. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to run as far as he could. But the logical part of his brain knew better. He couldn't outrun this. There was no place to hide. His hand trembled as he grabbed the worn map again, scanning the blue-circled location Peter had marked. The place Peter had been fixated on. The place where the Watcher had first appeared. "This is where it ends," Ellis muttered to himself, his voice barely more than a whisper. He had no choice now. He couldn't live like this. If he could call it living at all. The Watcher was consuming him, piece by piece, and if he didn't confront it, it would take everything. With a deep breath, Ellis gathered his things. A jacket, his phone, and Peter's scattered notes, and shoved them into a bag. His movements were mechanical, almost robotic. He couldn't afford to think, couldn't afford to hesitate. The moment he stopped to question himself, the shadows would close in, and he would be trapped forever. He headed out the door, his footsteps echoing through the hallway. The apartment building felt emptier than usual, as if it had been abandoned long before he arrived. No voices, no creaks from the neighbors upstairs. Just the endless hum of the static that followed him like a ghost. As Ellis stepped out into the cold, drizzling rain, the city greeted him with the same eerie stillness. The streets were empty, and the sky hung low, heavy with gray clouds. He walked quickly, eyes darting around, scanning every corner, every shadow, expecting to see the Watcher standing there, waiting. But it didn't appear. Not yet. The walk to the blue-circled location was long, winding through narrow streets and forgotten alleyways. As he ventured deeper into the heart of the city, the buildings grew older, their windows boarded up and their facades crumbling. It was as if he had entered a part of the city no one remembered. A place that had slipped between the cracks of time and space. When Ellis finally arrived at the address Peter had marked, his heart sank. It was an old, decrepit building, looming like a monument to decay. The windows were shattered, and the walls were stained with years of neglect. But there was something else about it, something wrong. The air on the building felt heavy, like it was thick with something unseen, something that crawled under his skin and made his breath hitch. The Watcher was here. Ellis stood frozen in front of the building, his hand gripping the strap of his bag so tightly his knuckles turned white. He knew the moment he stepped inside, there would be no going back, but he also knew he had no choice. With a shuddering breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The darkness inside swallowed him whole. The stale air smelled of mold and rot, and the creak of the floorboards beneath his feet echoed in the vast, empty space. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by his presence. Ellis flicked on his phone's flashlight, the narrow beam of light cutting through the darkness. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols he couldn't understand, scratched into the decaying plaster. They seemed to pulse and shift in the dim light, as though they were alive, moving just beneath the surface. He moved cautiously, every step deliberate, every breath shallow. The building groaned around him, as if it were alive, watching him with unseen eyes. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept moving forward, deeper into the bowels of the place. It wasn't until he reached the end of the long, narrow hallway that he felt it. The cold, suffocating presence of the Watcher. He stopped in his tracks, his flashlight flickering. Ahead of him was a door, slightly ajar, leading into a room bathed in shadow. The feeling of dread in his stomach intensified. He knew, without a doubt, that the Watcher was behind that door, waiting for him to step inside. But it wasn't just fear that stopped him. It was the realization that this moment had already happened. The scene was too familiar, like he was trapped in a memory that wasn't his own. Peter had been here. Ellis felt a chill crawl down his spine. Peter had faced this too, had stood in this very hallway, staring at the same door, knowing what waited on the other side. But Peter hadn't survived. He had left Ellis a trail to follow, a breadcrumb to lead him here. But why? To finish what Peter couldn't. To face the Watcher and either escape or be consumed. Ellis swallowed hard, his throat dry. There was no way back now. He stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for the door. It creaked open with a slow, agonizing groan, revealing the room inside. The flashlight flickered again, its beam weak and fading, barely illuminating the space. There, in the center of the room, stood the Watcher. It was no longer a distant figure shrouded in shadows. Now, it was a towering presence, its form twisted and unnatural, like a distortion of reality itself. Its face, or what passed for a face, was a swirling void, a dark abyss that seemed to suck in the light around it. Ellis's breath caught in his throat. The Watcher wasn't just looking at him now. It was inside him, crawling into his thoughts, filling every crevice of his mind with cold, suffocating fear. He tried to move, tried to back away, but his body wouldn't listen. He was frozen, paralyzed by the Watcher's presence. And then the voice came, low, distorted, and echoing inside his head. You were never alone. The words slithered through his mind, wrapping around his thoughts, tightening like a noose. His vision blurred, the world around him warping and bending. The shadows crawled across the walls, pulling him deeper into the darkness. Ellis tried to scream, but no sound came out. The Watcher was consuming him, piece by piece, erasing him from existence. In his final moments, as the shadows closed in, Ellis understood the truth. Peter hadn't left him a trail to follow. He had left him a trap. As the void swallowed him, Ellis realized the Watcher didn't need to find you, because it was already inside. If you enjoyed this chilling chapter and want to uncover what happens next, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who love a good scare. Ellis's journey isn't over yet. Stay tuned for the next chapter where the descent into darkness only deepens. You won't want to miss what's coming. The stories may end, but the nightmares continue. Sleep soundly, if your mind lets you.